Okay, so now that we've finished looking at all the repetition structures, I wanted to briefly summarize all the control structures that we've been exposed to. And so when we first started programming, we looked at just writing one instruction after another. And this is the default case in which we just write things in sequence. And then we started looking at cases where if something was true based on some particular condition, we may execute some set of statements, else we may execute something else, or nothing at all. We also looked at multiple alternatives with the else if. So this is what we call selection. Some people will refer to it as conditional statements or decision statements, but it's all the same thing. We're just simply posing some particular question. If that question turns out to be true, we'll do something. If not, we may do something else. Or we can have multiple alternatives, as I said before. And then finally, what we've just finished looking at is this idea of repetition, being able to repeat some set of instructions over and over again. So you'll find out as we construct our programs, we'll consistently use sequence, selection, and repetition. And most programming languages support control structures that allow for us to write programs that use sequence, selection, and repetition. Okay, so let's look at our problem statement for, this will be program 5. So we want to write a program that will ask the user to input a word that is at least 5 characters in length. Once a valid word has been inputted, we want to ask the user to input a character. The program will then calculate the number of times this inputted character appears in the word and output the result. So let's go ahead and get into Eclipse. We'll write some pseudocode, and then we'll transform that pseudocode into some C++ code, and we'll also see some new things here besides just repetition structures. So let's get to it. Alright, so before we get started with writing the pseudocode, I want to talk about a few string operations provided for us through C++. So let's go ahead and declare a string variable. So we'll have string x. I'm going to initialize it to hello. So if we look at the string hello, we can identify a lot of things about it. One thing we may say is that it has 5 characters. If we were to ask how many L's does it have, or how many lowercase L's does it have, to be specific, we could say it has 2 lowercase L's. So how do we go about getting that information when we write a program in C++? Well, in order to get the number of characters or the length of this particular string, we can use a function. And the function that we can use, actually we could use 2 different functions. One is the size function, the other is the length function. They both return the number of characters in a string. So how do we go about using the size of the length function? Well, if we just simply write the name of the string, in this case x, and then use what's called the dot operator, so it's just a little dot, a period, and then specify the name of the function, we could either say size or length here, and then it would just be open paren, close paren. So this thing right here is just an operation that gets the length or the size of this particular string here. And then we could make this a statement in which we assign this value here. So this is going to return an integer value to us. So we could declare an int variable, and we'll just call it length, for lack of a better name, and assign this result to length. So let me make sure this is a statement by putting a semicolon here. So out in memory somewhere, so we'll just say over here in memory, we have length. This is just labeling some particular location in memory, and we would have the value of 5 stored at that particular memory location, since hello does in fact have 5 characters. Another thing that we may be interested in doing is retrieving a character at a particular location. And the way that we go about doing that is, again, just specifying the name of the string variable, then using the dot operator, and then specifying the name of the function, in this case at. Now the at function is interesting in the sense that we actually had to supply an argument here. The argument that's being supplied here is actually the position of the character that we want to retrieve in the string. So if we had the string hello, and I'm going to just write it down again, each one of these characters has a particular position or index value. So the first one is 0, the second 1, third 2, the fourth one 3, and the fifth one is 4. So you can see that in this particular case, we have 5 characters here, and as characters are labeled with these values starting with 0. So if we wanted to retrieve, say, the third character in our string hello, we'd actually write 2 here because that is the index value for the third character. So this particular operation here returns a character value. So what we can do is just simply declare a character, maybe ch, and do something like that. So this here would just simply return the value of L, the character L, and we would store it into this character ch. So somewhere out in memory would have ch, and what would be stored there would just be a lowercase l. So these two functions will come in handy for program 5, the size function. Also, you could have wrote length here, so either one of these is fine, length or size. Size is a little bit shorter to write. And the at function, just simply returning a character at a particular position. One other thing that you may note about the index values here is that the last valid index for a particular string, the index is always 1 less than the length, and that's an important characteristic to remember. All right, so let's take this new information, and maybe once we finish writing the pseudocode, we can apply the size and the add function in this program 5. Okay, so it looks like we're ready to write some pseudocode. So I've already created the project folder, and I've also created the source file. So if you haven't created the project folder and source file for program 5, go ahead and pause the video now and then create the project folder and source file. Okay, so we've already copied in the problem statement here, and we know that we need to ask the user to input a word that's at least 5 characters in length. So what we're going to do is just simply say that we will ask the user to input a word. But we're not satisfied with them just inputting a word because it may not meet the condition of being 5 characters in length. So we want to repeatedly ask them for a word. So ask the user to input a word while the word length is less than 5. I'll just write that as less than 5. And then once they've inputted a word that's of the correct length, then we'll move on and then get a character from them. And this character is going to be the character that we're going to look for in that word and count how many times we find that character in the word. So we'll just say ask the user to input a character. All right, so once we have the character and we have the word, we can then do what? Basically at that point in time, we want to look at each individual character in that word and compare it to the character that they inputted. So we're going to say that we iterate over the word. Okay, so whenever you hear the word iterate, you need to be thinking about repetition control structures. All right, so as we iterate through that word, we want to get a character. And once we get a character from word, we want to see if the character matches the character that we're looking for. That's a bit of a long line there, but that's what we want to do. And what turns out is if that character matches, we want to do a specific operation. We want to increment some counter. So increment a counter. So that counter is just keeping track of how many times we've seen that character in that word. All right, so once we've done that, we can then say we want to output the number of times, or maybe, output the number of times the character was found in the word. And that's our basic pseudocode there. Ask the user to input a word, input a character. Basically, we're going to go over the word, iterate over the word, get a character. If the character matches the character we're looking for, increment the counter, and then output the number of times the character was found, which will be stored in our counter. All right, so let's go ahead and start writing some C++ code. Okay, so let's add in our pound includes. So we need to have pound include IOStream. We also need to have pound include string, and using namespace standard. So we have our normal stuff that we've been seeing. Now we're ready to write our main function. So int main open paren close paren will be the main function header. Open brace, close brace. So we'll come down below our last pseudocode comment here and do the close brace. And then I'll select all the pseudocode and just tab in one level so it matches up with our source code that we're about to write. Okay, so how do we go about asking the user to input a word while the word length is less than 5? Well, let's just discuss how we go about asking the user to input a word. Well, we need to have a string variable, and we'll just call it word, and we'll initialize it to the empty string. And we also need to prompt the user to input what we would like. So we'll say enter a word that has at least 5 characters. We'll make use of our indel here. And then once we've prompted them, then we can read it in by using our cin and the extraction operator and then storing whatever they've typed in to the variable word. Okay. Now our situation is that if they input a word that's less than 5 characters in length, we want to repeat that operation. We want to keep prompting them to enter in a word. Hopefully they'll eventually enter in a word that's 5 characters in length. So we have a couple of looping structures that we can look at. We have the while, the for, and the do while. And since we know that we want to do these 2 operations here, the cout operation, the cin operation, at least one time, and possibly more than that, we probably want to use the do while. So I'll write do, open brace, and then tab all this in here, these 2 lines of code, and then have a close brace. And then we'll say while what? Well, we got to write our condition. But we want to repeat those operations, the cout and the cin operation, while the word length, or we can say size, so word.size, open paren, close paren. So we're making use of that function called size, while the size of the word or the length of the word is less than 5. So here we're just making use of that function that returns an integer value and comparing it to 5. Okay, don't forget the semicolon on the end. That's necessary to have a semicolon on the end.